You will understand who the leading candidates for Satoshi Nakamoto are, why the mystery matters, and what evidence exists for each theory. On January 3rd, 2009, at precisely 6:15 p.m. UTC, a single block of code appeared on a network that didn't exist 24 hours earlier. Hidden inside that block, the Genesis block, was a message, the Times 03/Jan/2009 Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. The person who embedded that message would go on to invent a currency now worth over $1 trillion. No one has ever met them, no photograph exists, no verified email after 2011, no transaction from their wallets containing an estimated 1 million Bitcoin, worth tens of billions of dollars today, has ever been moved. And despite decades of investigations, court cases, cryptographic analysis, and international media scrutiny, we still don't know who they are. This is the story of the most important unsolved mystery in modern technology. You're about to understand why the creator of Bitcoin disappeared, who the leading candidates really are, what evidence exists for each theory, and why one man's attempt to claim the identity ended in one of the most spectacular courtroom failures in legal history. By the end, you'll know more about Satoshi Nakamoto than 99% of people who own cryptocurrency. On October 31st, 2008, in the middle of the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, a 9-page PDF appeared on a cryptography mailing list. No one on the list had heard that name before. No academic record, no prior papers, no conference appearances. Just a clean, technically elegant proposal for a decentralized currency that required no banks, no governments, no trusted intermediaries. 2 months later, on January 3rd, 2009, Nakamoto launched the Bitcoin network by mining the very first block, the Genesis block. Inside that block, they embedded a headline from that day's edition of the Times of London, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It wasn't random, it was a timestamp, proof the block couldn't have been mined earlier. But it was also a statement, a quiet middle finger to the financial system that had just collapsed the global economy. For the next 2 years, Nakamoto was active. They communicated on forums, responded to developers, fixed bugs, collaborated with early contributors to refine the protocol. Their writing style was precise, professional. They used British English spelling, favor instead of favor, color instead of color. Their time zone activity suggested they were operating somewhere in the GMT zone, possibly the UK or Europe. Then, in April 2011, Nakamoto sent their final known message. "I've moved on to other things," they wrote to a developer. "It's in good hands." They never logged in again, never moved a single Bitcoin from the wallets they mined in the early days, wallets estimated to hold around 1 million BTC. At today's prices, that's worth tens of billions of dollars. The disappearance raised immediate questions. Was Nakamoto a single person or a group? Were they still alive? Did they lose access to their private keys? Or were they intentionally staying hidden to protect Bitcoin's decentralization, ensuring no single founder could influence or control the network? But that didn't stop people from trying to find out. The hunt for Satoshi Nakamoto has produced some of the wildest theories and some of the most tragic misidentifications in internet history. Finney was a legendary cryptographer and one of the earliest Bitcoin adopters. On January 12, 2009, he received the very first Bitcoin transaction ever sent from Satoshi Nakamoto. Finney was brilliant. He had worked on digital cash systems before Bitcoin. His writing style, technical ability, and proximity to the project made him a leading candidate. But Finney repeatedly denied being Satoshi, and in 2014 he died from ALS, taking any remaining answers with him. Some believe Finney was Satoshi, and the denial was part of the plan. Others think he was simply the first person Satoshi trusted. Szabo is a computer scientist and cryptographer, who in 1998 proposed a decentralized digital currency called BitGold. BitGold was never implemented, but its design bears striking similarities to Bitcoin. Stylometric analysis, linguistic forensics, has suggested that Szabo's writing patterns closely match Satoshi's. Szabo has consistently denied being Nakamoto, but the circumstantial evidence is strong enough that many in the crypto community believe he's the most likely candidate. In March 2014, Newsweek published a cover story claiming to have found Satoshi Nakamoto, a 64-year-old Japanese-American man living in California whose birth name was actually Satoshi Nakamoto. The article went viral. Media crews camped outside his house. The internet exploded. Dorian Nakamoto had nothing to do with Bitcoin. He was a retired engineer who had never heard of cryptocurrency. He issued an immediate, emphatic denial. It was a catastrophic case of mistaken identity and a sobering reminder of how dangerous the hunt for Satoshi could become. Len Sassaman was a privacy-focused cryptographer and cypherpunk who worked on encryption tools and anonymity networks. He was active in the same circles as early Bitcoin developers. In July 2011, just months after Satoshi's final message, Sassaman died by suicide. Some researchers have noted the timeline correlation and suggested Sassaman could have been Satoshi, with his death explaining the permanent silence. But like the others, there's no hard proof, just tragic timing and speculation. An Australian computer scientist, who in 2016 publicly claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto, Wright provided supposed cryptographic proof. He gave interviews. He filed lawsuits. He pursued legal recognition in multiple countries. Cryptographers found his proofs were invalid. Signatures were recycled from old public transactions. Documents were altered. Timestamps didn't match. But Wright didn't stop. He continued to claim the identity. He sued developers. He threatened critics. He demanded recognition. That's when a UK High Court judge issued a devastating ruling. The court found that the evidence Wright submitted to support his claim was forged. The written judgment, released in May 2024, stated that Wright had lied to the court extensively and repeatedly. The legal system had spoken. Craig Wright is not Satoshi Nakamoto. It was one of the most humiliating courtroom defeats in recent memory, and it closed the door on one of the longest-running fraudulent claims in tech history. Why does it matter if we never know who created Bitcoin? Because Satoshi Nakamoto didn't just invent a currency, they invented a new model of trust. Bitcoin works because no single person controls it. No CEO can shut it down. No government can unilaterally change the rules. The network is decentralized by design, and that decentralization depends in part on Satoshi's absence. If Satoshi reappeared tomorrow and moved even a fraction of their Bitcoin, markets would panic. If they started making public statements about the protocol's future, it would centralize influence. If they were revealed to be a government agent, a corporate entity, or a controversial figure, it could delegitimize the entire project. Satoshi's disappearance might have been the most important decision they ever made, but it also means we're left with a mystery that grows larger every year. A mystery investigated by journalists, cryptographers, private detectives, and intelligence agencies around the world. Some believe Satoshi is dead. Others think they're watching from the shadows, satisfied that their creation has survived without them. Some think Satoshi was always a group, a collective using a single pseudonym to protect the project's decentralized ethos. And some think the mystery is permanent by design, that we were never meant to know, that the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto is the final safeguard against Bitcoin ever being controlled by a single person. Satoshi Nakamoto published a white paper on October 31, 2008. They launched Bitcoin on January 3, 2009. They embedded a message about bank bailouts in the Genesis block. They collaborated with early developers for 2 years. They used British English spelling. They disappeared in April 2011. And despite everything, the investigations, the theories, the court cases, the media spectacles, we still don't know who they are. 1. Anonymity was the strategy, not an accident. Satoshi's disappearance preserved Bitcoin's decentralization and might be the reason it still works. 2. The greatest mystery in tech isn't always meant to be solved. Some secrets protect the systems they create. 3. The search for Satoshi has hurt real people. Dorian Nakamoto's life was upended by false accusations, a reminder that internet investigations have real-world consequences. If you want more deep dives into the biggest unsolved mysteries in tech, business, and finance, subscribe now. Tomorrow, we're investigating the shadowy world of decentralized autonomous organizations and the Day-O hack that almost killed Ethereum.